Before we get started, does anyone want to get out?
As always, for these kind of recordings, I want to offer a warning. Before we get started, does anyone want to get out? Classic Captain America. Okay. This particular gentleman is a graduate student. I don't know if he has his PhD, whether he's a doctor or where he teaches or exactly what his degree in. I'm not quite sure. I haven't done enough background on the guy. Not that it matters. Okay, but this particular guy is a intersectional feminist by the name of FD Signifier. This is where pro-black meets woke. When they mix all that stuff in together, and they come out with what they call a revolutionary Marxist black feminist objective. Okay, so he comes out of the same school as BLM. Let's put it that way. And how can you tell he's a black feminist is by the verbiage that he uses. And in this particular video, I'm going to try to not make it too long. That's how come I really didn't want to do it. These kind of guys do so much study, they read so much, and what they actually do is they use a lot of code words, a lot of arcane and obscure papers, and they throw them out. Okay, they don't explain them, but they throw them out. They don't even go through their arguments, because if they went through the arguments, it would fall apart. Because what I believe, I'm not even going to say I have his education, because I don't, but I have it on authority because I talked to people that taught him, or people that are teachers in the field where he learns, that actually taught this kind of stuff. They throw out a lot of buzzwords and straw mans, but they throw so many out there that you have to pick through them to get to an argument. But they lace enough straw mans and enough buzzwords together to make it seem like a cogent argument. And so what you're going to hear, I'm going to play like 30 minutes of it, because this is talking about the black manosphere. In particular, it goes through the manosphere. But if you really want to go through the whole hour and a half video, which probably will make your head hurt, I'll put the link in the description. But I'm going to try to keep it short, because he really doesn't go into depth. I'm not going to try to deconstruct every argument that he puts up, because it would take way too long. This is only like a 30-minute segment, and it would take about 4 hours to deconstruct every point he puts out, because he throws it out there. So I'm going to do my best to actually not refute, but actually counter some of the words he says with something hopefully just as short, which is probably going to be difficult. Because I was listening to it, man, my head was already hurting. Because when people misuse information, man, my head hurts. And when people throw out concepts that are not understood by most people, and I don't think they're halfway understood by him. Okay, because he's throwing out a lot of concepts about that he half understands, because he's read something and his teachers have told him that this is true, and he believes it. So he is as much a product of hegemonic culturalism as anybody else. Hegemonic culturalism doesn't mean that it's a white man in charge, even though Connell actually said that's what has been used as far as white supremacy is concerned. But that doesn't mean that the tool can't be used by other people, which white feminists and also intersectional feminists, such as this gentleman here, have used also, or can use. And they're using it now. That's how they got power. How do you think BLM acquired so much money? But anyway, we're getting ready to get started. So if you're not out by now, this is a TLDR, too long don't read. So if you don't want to sit through a lot of arcane language and some esoteric counterpoints, this ain't the video for you. This was sent to me by a sub, and it was also sent to a bunch of the PhDs. If I say other PhDs, I'll be including myself, which I am not an academic. I'm going to say that up front. I'm not an academic. Don't pretend to be. I don't believe in stolen valor. If I didn't pick up a rifle and sit in a foxhole or a tank or something like that, I'm not going to say that I served in the military. So just as I wouldn't say I served in the military, I'm not going to say that I'm an academic. I didn't get my degree. I didn't put my black tassel on. I didn't, suffer enslaved through the papers and in the classes and hours to get a degree. I'm not going to steal their valor. They earn what they get. They deserve the title that they have. And So I'm not going to claim it, even though I put in work, but not that kind of work. So without further ado, let's get the party started. This is Explaining the Manosphere by an intersectional feminist. All right, let's crank it up.
Don't care about the actual foundational knowledge about the shit I'm about to talk and just want to hear me shit on Gary Vee and other manosphere figures, go ahead, skip ahead. It's in the description, but you're not going to learn any new big words.
Yeah, boys and girls, this is Romper Room for intersectional feminists already. Okay, so let's get started, man. It's already funny.
I've said the term hegemonic a few times in this and other videos, so it's really important that I probably give some context to explain that. The term hegemony is a really significant term in the world of critical theory and comes from Italian Marxist philosopher Antonio Gramsci, and is basically a concept that explains how society and culture and the state dominates the frameworks through which we understand and see the world, and also how we expect the world and society to work, look, and function. Gramsci states,
what we can do for the moment is to fix two major superstructural levels. The one that could be called civil society, that is the ensemble of organisms commonly called privates, and that of political society, or the state. These two levels correspond on the one hand to the function of hegemony, which the dominant group exercises throughout society.
Also, they call this, Hobbes called this the Leviathan. And basically the reason Hobbes called this the Leviathan, with the two groups coming together, because how do you settle private or individual disputes or individual rights or individual conflict, right? And come up with a certain segment of privileges and rights that all members of society can agree upon. You form a what? Leviathan, and eventually it forms a what? Hegemony, okay? So hegemonic cultural experience is not bad. Everybody does it. It's been done, all the way back to the city-states of Egypt, the 9 nomes of Egypt. A group or a certain function of group that are powerful have to come together and bring together society. Otherwise, you won't have one. And it's when you come to a state, as we enjoy, a civilized state as we enjoy, you're going to have a Leviathan or a hegemonic group, whether we elect them or they elect themselves, to pull them together. So it's not bad. So a critical theory has to be weighed and measured just like any other theory.
And on the other hand, to that of direct domination or command exercised through the state and judicial government.
Culture.
This one, like I'm saying, that's the Leviathan. You have to go back to Hobbes. You got to go back to Locke, and you got to go back to Rousseau, which Green Gorilla just aptly put together in about a 10-hour lecture about the social contract, which Marxism and socialism actually arose. When I said we're not going to go this point by point because it's going to make the video too long. Continuing.
Hegemony and hegemonic thinking is really the bane of so much socially ingrained injustice that seems to be.
It's actually not the bane, because you wouldn't have a social group or a state or what you call a structure, a superstructure, as you enact your rules upon. Okay, you are a product of that state. You're a product of that structure. The T-shirt, the mug behind you, the school that you went to is all a product of that. So saying that it's the bane of it is bullshit, because you wouldn't have it if it wasn't. Your laws, your precepts, your liberal ideology is all through this hegemonic system. Your school system is part of the hegemonic system, which you have gone through. So it's like a little kid peeing on its parents' carpet. But continuing.
Impossible to avoid, no matter your identity. It's what causes comments that say man should never order fruity drinks, or that a woman who has a good job has masculine energy.
I wish they would stop using kindergarten. Well, he's going to have to, because he's trying to simplify it, right? And he has to talk to you like you're a 10-year-old, okay? Because I'm not even going to get into that. But let's continue before I digress too much. I'm going to try not to digress as much. I won't let it play.
Like the whole conversation right now about unions and about whether or not people deserve a livable wage is a hegemonic concept ingrained very much here in America, that somehow people that don't work hard enough should starve to death.
Actually, it's bullshit, because you have a mixed economy between socialism and capitalism. Because before capitalism or industrial capitalism, you had slave labor. Go back to the Greeks, okay? You had serfdom and slave labor. What do you call that? But anyway, continuing.
That's an ideology we don't question. We just kind of take as true, as an axiom. That's what hegemony does. It gives you ideas that you just take as fact because that's the way it should be, without thinking about the fact that we kind of get to choose what it.
No, you don't get to choose. It's called a social agreement. Okay. You don't get to choose. You ain't no kind of get to choose. You don't kind of get to choose whether you want to run a red light. Okay. You don't kind of get to choose about what kind of cash that you use, how you exchange value, right? Don't kind of get to choose that. You have to be socialized into a system. Okay. Continue. He triggers me. Let me stop. Let me kind of let it play. Okay. Because I'll get triggered like every 30 seconds.
Is and what isn't in our society. And there's a Foucault quote in there somewhere about the panopticon and Durkheim on organic solidarity. This next section is going to be full of, look, I read the old white folks books stuff, so just bear with me. Hegemony is very much socially constructed and thus is subject to change, meaning that we agree as a society that, I don't know, dreadlocks are not professional. We'll come back to that in a second. Even though there's no explicit reason to think of how someone wears a hairstyle as indicative of their ability to work a particular job. But sadly, many people treat social constructions such as hair and fashion and gender as immutable and natural things and will fight for them even when the fight doesn't really involve them in order to maintain.
A structure has to be maintained, okay? If you don't have any rules, you don't have any agreements, guess what you have? You have what they call chaos. Now, if you agree that chaos is an outcome that you want, which I know you don't because you argue against it, later on. Anyway, let me stop being triggered.
Maintain a natural order in order to maintain hegemony. This brings us to the concept of hegemonic masculinity, crafted by sociologist R.W. Connell with support by James Messerschmitt. Simply put, Connell took the concept of hegemony and expanded it to the performance of masculinity, i.e., what culturally idealized and prescribed features should a person performing masculinity.
That's actually bullshit. That's not what she said. It's how hegemonic masculinity, which is white supremacy, and white men enforce their cultural mores upon the rest of the world. How to bank, how to use your money, what kind of government you should have, what place other people should be in a particular government, who are your winners and losers. It has nothing to do with icon of what masculinity should be. Okay, hegemonic masculinity is basically a domination of imposing your will upon your structure upon other men. A better treatise of this kind of stuff is Jim Sedania's social dominance theory. Okay, R.W. Connell kind of fluffs around it, but the thing is, Jim Sedanius actually gets to the root of the problem. But he's not going to mention Jim Sedanius because it's not a white person's book, and he's a intersectional feminist, and intersectional feminists hate people like Jim Sedanius and Dr. Curry.
We have. Again, these things change from culture to culture, space to space, and time to time. Black men in America who are marginalized because of race still have a framework of masculinity within community that they adhere to and aspire to, and is different from what white men do or Latino men do, or what black men might do in other parts of the world, or what they did 20 years ago in a lot of ways. Even among queer men, there's going to be nuances and a hierarchy around what a good man is and what a good man is not. And yes, there is a feminine counterpart, but this video is long enough. But it's basically pick me. It's not that hard to get. Another foundational concept that I want to bring up is what Connell calls the patriarchal dividend. This is a fancier way of saying the material or psychological manifestation of male privilege. All men, and yes, that includes not just white, but BIPOC, queer, trans, etc. men, benefit on some level from our patriarchal system, some obviously much more than others. No matter how much they align with women, no matter how they vote.
Also, women also get a patriarchal dividend because the patriarchal dividend of child support, alimony, support for men supporting children who are their responsibility, protection from outside invaders, structural resources that they get is also a patriarchal dividend because women are not expected to participate in the building of such things. So they can faint back on their fainting couch and take advantage of the patriarchal dividend that is also given to women. Got to remember, there's a balance. There's winners and losers, but also there's privileges and responsibilities. A lot of sexual feminists like him focus on the privileges, but not the responsibilities, which most of the patriarchal dividends that the patriarchal system was actually built on over thousands of years was actually eroded to almost nothing in the current state. Because in the current state, there's no such thing as a patriarchy. What you have is a remnant of what used to be a patriarchal system. But I just did 3 videos on that. I don't feel like rehashing that. So continuing.
No matter the various other intersections through which patriarchy may also hurt them, within a patriarchal society.
Notice the word intersection. Bingo. Ding.
There will always be a continuum of privilege between men and non-men. That is the patriarchal dividend.
What is
but
men
the
and
thing
non-men?
is, for some men, especially men.
What is men and non-men? Okay. So if you're a transgender man, you get a patriarchal dividend? Is that what you're saying? Or is a transgender man that used to be a woman and now a man, do they qualify if they perform being men? Or are they considered non-men? Or is a queer man a non-man? He never explains that, but that's what I mean. He's throwing out straw man and buzzwords.
Who clearly are very close to the aforementioned masculine ideal, aka someone like Hassan, or some of these men can often feel like what they're getting isn't what they're really owed, that they're not getting enough of that patriarchal dividend. They feel like they're doing the right things, performing masculinity in the appropriate way, upholding the appropriate values, but they don't see the results they believe they're supposed to get. They're not getting the job. They're not getting the girl. They're not getting the respect. There's a specific feeling that comes from this that sociologist Michael Kimmel calls aggrieved entitlement. And I want to quickly mention that Kimmel, who is one of the more prominent figures in masculine studies in sociology, has in the past few years had his own rash of accusations of workplace bullying and sexism, the irony of which is not lost on me. However, his works...
See what I mean? He's throwing around a lot of terms and a lot of people and a lot of things without completely explaining what the hell he's talking about. Okay. So you're getting a word salad, you're getting a cornucopia of terms and themes that haven't been fleshed out or even explained as far as an argument. He's building an argument like Dr. Johnson said on straw men. Some of the things that he quotes, some of the things that he's putting out don't really apply. But continuing.
Still stands as some of the more insightful academic texts in the studies of masculinities. Quick aside, none of the great thinkers that provide us with some of the more important academic theories are without fault or with bad takes. Bell Hooks had more than a few bad takes on black men that did not...
At least he acknowledges that. Now, why is Bell Hooks considered a great thinker? That's what I'm curious about. Why is Bell Hooks considered a great thinker? That tells you he's an intersectional feminist. That's his hero. Now, continuing.
Age well and really hated Beyonce, was not a fan. W.E.B. Du Bois was a proponent of eugenics later in his life, and Karl Marx was a fuckboy. So stop deifying the theorists.
Karl Marx is a fuckboy? What? Okay. Well, women kind of try to come back and basically decimate themselves on the backside to protect what they think is an exposed rear end. Anyway, continuing.
I should just rock with the theory as much as it is useful to us. And so that's what we're going to do here. Kimmel describes aggrieved entitlement as a sense of shame and frustration and eventually rage that comes from men who feel like their patriarchal dividend has been denied in some way. He states,
that shame and humiliation underlie basically all violence. Because I feel small, I will make you feel smaller. In my interviews with extremists, both actives and formers, I have found time and time again that they've experienced that sense of humiliation and shame. At least in the case of the German, Swedish, and American guys that I interviewed, sometimes it is not really political at all. Many of them, especially the American guys, were sexually abused, beat up, bullied as children. Some of them have basically the same sort of profile as the victims of Catholic priests. Growing up, they were deeply ashamed of themselves. They didn't do well in school. They didn't have friends. They were sad, miserable, and they escaped into themselves. That just made them better targets, and the far right drew them in.
I'm going to interchangeably refer to aggrieved entitlement and main character syndrome because they're kind of the same thing. It's just one was said by a big sociologist, but you get the...
See what I mean? He's mixing in a lot of different theories without really fleshing them out, without really examining them. And that's the problem. There's almost too many, which is probably what they really do. They throw in a whole bunch of stuff, and it's going to take you way too long to deconstruct the stuff or even argue with it. But even the unions and stuff like that where people work in 16-hour days or 20-hour days, or soldiers that laid their lives on the line wanted a dividend or some kind of dividend, because that's a system that they put their work and their sweat and their equity into, and they didn't get their worth out of it. Socialism was actually built on that. Marxism was actually built on that. Feminism was actually built on that. Okay, so that applies to all people. We're not even getting into the suicides and stuff like that, or the violence. Okay, violence is not always propagated by a patriarchal dividend. Okay, the far right has a different conversation with their government that has very little to do with racism. Okay, racism is a part, but a patriarchal dividend in patriarchy has less to do with the far right than you actually think. But that is his opinion. But continuing.
Gist of it, I hope. I'm bringing these concepts up because they are fundamental and really important concepts for explaining and exploring the manosphere from my perspective. The manosphere is a loose network of mostly online communities and media entities with a wide variety of ideologies and styles and arguments, but all of them agree with one major core tenet, which is that modern men are in a state of crisis, and 9 times out of 10, the next thing they'll say is because of women.
9 times out of 10 because of women. Not really. Women are a problem, but women are not the cause. And MGTOW, IBMOR, SYSBM, even they would say that is not the problem. The problem is the societal structure that men exist in this particular environment. Social, political, family court, jobs, whatever, right? Even the educational system has way more to do with it than just women. Women per se as an entity are not the problem. Women are actually a product of the system. So basically the argument, including MGTOW, if he actually examined it, MGTOW especially as an outgrowth of the men's rights movement, which is political and legal protest against the family courts and what feminism was actually taken away from and putting upon them what they thought was unjust and unfair. But that's a different story. That's a completely different story. That's actually the beginning of the manosphere. Manosphere is actually a response to feminism and the ravages upon the family in their lives that feminism actually wrought. Continuing.
And before I get into all the ways in which they're wrong about many things, I want to point out as a whole that these men are definitely correct to at least feel like something is wrong. Men of all races are in a state of crisis, and for white men, this crisis is made more complicated by the emergence of widely accepted critical theories such as postmodernism, intersectional feminism, critical race theory, etc., that are reframing the way we understand race and gender, slowly eroding at the hegemonic space of power for them for the first time in modern history. It's no wonder that you'll hear of those philosophical movements I just mentioned as dangerous to civilization. For the first time in history, some white men have something they've never really had before: fear of social repercussions, aka accountability. Between Me Too and cancel culture and camera phones, etc., white men for the first time have to at least think about the consequences of acting upon their racial and gender privilege. They need to make sure no one has camera phones when they throw their racist frat parties. They need to think about what they're going to say on live streams in case something gets clipped out of context. They need to make sure that the group text chats full of racist and sexist conversations don't have their real names on it. Now, in reality, all of this doesn't amount to a lot of real material differences for everyone else. Getting 1 or 2 white men fired from their job or embarrassed and dragged online for being racist is not really the revolution we've been working toward.
Well, actually, it is, because the blowback that you're going to get from doing this kind of crap or going at a structure that you depended on for so long does have consequences. But people don't think that, it's all upside. There is no downside, which is female thinking. Let's put it that way. It's just female thinking. There is no downside. There's only me and my privilege, or the privilege that I want, and whatever the downside or responsibility that comes along with it, well, that doesn't count anyhow.
And definitely not the great replacement that many white men seem to fear. But there's this old saying that when you're used to privilege, equity can feel like oppression. And that's what we see and get from so many white reactionary manosphere type spaces. They don't understand this feeling of essentially being racialized as white men, and understanding that it means something that maybe it didn't mean just a few years ago. However, it's deeper than that. One thing that we need to be far more critical of is the fact that all men, including white men, are dealing with numerous challenges that have eroded at their mental, physical, and economic health over the last 30 plus years or so. Many of you probably are aware that white men account for a disparate amount of suicides in America, with some studies having them responsible for up to 70% of suicides in the States. In UK, men's suicides are over 3 times as likely than for women. And rates of suicide in the UK and the US have risen over the last 20 years, greatly because of the suicide of white men. Suicide strongly correlates to social issues and economics and health. So white men notwithstanding, suicide rates for Native Americans, the disabled, queer, and queer youth are higher than any other population, which should provide some perspective on the real structural issues in our society.
I mean, you see, he throws it out, but he never explains it. He throws it out as a pillar of his argument, but he never explains it. That's why I said it's a word salad, which is kind of why it's kind of hard to pick through anything that he says. It's really difficult to actually pick through all his arguments, because he throws about 5 or 6 that he never really explains, and then you can't counter every point because he really doesn't hold fast to any point. He kind of groups them all together and say, well, just accept them. They're all the same. If you accept all my pillars, then you don't have to actually examine them one by one.
And how that erodes on our mental health. However, with those populations, I think we have some understanding as to why that's the case. We know why queer people and queer youth turn to self-harm in a society
why
that
is that?
Prosecutes them.
Why
we
is
have
that?
well-developed understandings for these disparities. For white men who occupy such a clear space of privilege in the US and I'm sure in the UK as well, why is there such a disparity? Why are these boys and men killing themselves? While at least on paper, they should have way less to be concerned about. The data and research points to things like mental illness, substance addiction, as well as economic and social instability, and an absence of effective coping mechanisms, often exacerbated by an adherence to classical views of masculinity. Suicide among white men is more common in rural areas, which have higher poverty, as well as higher access to guns and lower access to quality healthcare. Yet, and you all know this, these same rural areas vote against any and all progressive policies that might help them, because they, like most of America, are very conservative, because conservatism in America is part of the hegemony, at least in a specific demonstrable sense. And this is the enduring paradox of the crisis of men. There is a hegemonic hold that often has to be severed first, or at least greatly weakened, before boys and men are able to actually deal with the problems they all face, which is living as men under late capitalism, being the gears in a capitalist patriarchal system that benefits them, definitely, but also consumes them as fuel. Ian Danskin describes this in his
So in other words, if it consumes them as fuel and they work hard and they prop up the system, are they not owed a patriarchal dividend, according to you? Because who actually gets that dividend? Who are they working for? Their children, their family, their wives. So they're actually doing this on their own and they're all by themselves. Anyway. Continue. I would actually stop this way too much. Let me let this roll, because we're only like we're 30 minutes in of a 30-minute video. Only like it's 30 minutes already, and we've only gone like a third of the video. Let me let it roll a little bit more.
Right playbook series, specifically on the video How to Radicalize a Normie.
Gabe has concerns like economic precarity, not knowing his place in a changing world, stressful working conditions. In other words, Gabe is suffering under late capitalism, same as everyone.
Pretty much all the things that are...
In other words, if you read Heidegger, talking about the economic being, right? Heidegger says that stress and change, the speed of change of society causes stress and anxiety. And anxiety is what causes Gabe to want to commit suicide. Okay. One thing that a human being, especially culturally, cannot stand is an extreme amount of change. An extreme amount of change and the speed of change will cause anxiety. Anxiety causes depression and other kinds of mental ills, and that's what causes suicide. But Signifier is not going to go through that. He's not going to go through Heidegger.
Said there to be plaguing men, especially white men, can be explained through understanding the exploitative nature of capitalism and how men play a specific and important role in the maintenance of capitalism.
Well, how do you explain, if it's just patriarchy, how do you explain rural farmers in India committing suicide? Okay. Or females diving to their deaths in China, in work factories. Okay. It is capitalism, it is stress, but it's not patriarchy or males. Why do females attempt suicide? Is it because of patriarchy? Why is in a communist country like the Soviet Union, so suicides and alcoholism was extremely high? Are they a capitalist country? Or even then, were they a capitalist country? The thing is this is reductive and simplified. But this is, like I said, this is like Sesame Street for intersectional feminists. They throw out a lot of terms, they don't explain it, and they put a lot of things in that don't belong. But continuing.
A role that for the vast majority of them requires a traumatizing debasement of their sense of self and humanity. Men have to be the arbiters and vectors of patriarchal power. Patriarchy does not work with our support. We are the glue that keeps that machine together. But consider how glue is made. I'm reminded of Boxer from George Orwell's Animal Farm. Long story short, the animals are the proletariat and the pigs are the bourgeois, and you should really read the book. It's like 100 pages long. It's a good one. Boxer is a horse, and he is the strongest and hardest working of all the other animals. He neglects his physical health as well as his intellectual development to focus on his role of being the workhorse, which is an esteemed and valued role that brings some admiration and respect from his peers. Even though as he works harder, he is slowly destroying his body. He does this without question because he believes that in the end, the pigs who have all the real power will reward him for his toil and dedication in the social order that he's helped build, that is impossible to create without his help. This is the plight of men right now. Much like Boxer, many men are intensely aligned and committed to the hegemonic belief system that their performance of their role in society gives them rewards and will give them their patriarchal dividend, will make them the main character of their story. And much like Boxer, they are guaranteed nothing, no matter what they do, unless of course they can somehow find themselves a pathway to the top of the hierarchy, which very, very few men of any race are capable of doing when they have to actually start from scratch. And the manosphere in various ways offers the false promise of fixing this problem, of making you a man.
That is not true. That is not true. That's not what the manosphere is about. And they don't give you that promise. They never have. They give you a coping mechanism to make your life better in the environment that you're in. Okay, not rising to the top. They never said that. They never said you're going to make a lot of money, make $1 million, or bang a lot of chicks, or be happy with the chicks that you have, right? Because, like you said, the manosphere is broader than just a pickup artist or a dating coach or relationship coach. It's much broader than that. Okay, so you actually reducing the manosphere to dating and mating, right? Which people do talk about, but people also talk about relationships to women, okay, to family, whether you should have a family or not, whether you should participate or not, but you don't put that in. Okay, you actually reduce the manosphere to what women have told you that it is. If you said that you've done your work, which most guys haven't, because to actually understand the manosphere, you got to participate, which I don't think he ever has. Anyhow, continuing.
So great that you'll definitely get the dividend you've always wanted. The promise of giving you a map to be the main character that you've always wanted to be. This messaging works because these boys and men, whether they're edgelords or good-looking petite bourgeois boys of relative privilege, feel the squeeze, feel the sense of existential dread, and they want to address it. They want to address what are actually the failures and limitations of patriarchy under capitalism with performing patriarchy under capitalism.
So if you go back to Animal Farm, It's really not the horse is really not about a male. It's about a peasant, and how peasants have been used as glue in communism. If they've been promised that they're going to get an elevation, they're going to get unity, they'll get their utopia. That's what the horse is. Animal. He's actually trying to pass off the pigs as capitalists, and they're not. The pigs are actually communists, which George Orwell actually wrote them as, because the farmer was the capitalist. Okay, the pigs were actually presented as brotherhood, as workers, as workers unite, because all the animals were workers. And what they were actually saying is that there's going to be hierarchy anyway. Okay, just because you've been sold the idea of unity and cooperation and equity, as you put it. Even feminists are doing the same shit. As you put it, really, what's going to happen is that a group will arise and actually form another kind of hierarchy, which is what Animal Farm was actually about. But he's not going to tell you that. In fact, this all goes all the way back to the patriae and the plebes in Rome that formed the Roman Republic. So, in the exact same thing happened. That's just human nature. But thing is, he's not going to tell you that either. He's going to blame it on patriarchy and capitalism, which is not true. Continuing.
Capitalism. So today we have men from Gen X, Millennials, Gen Z, and soon to be Gen Alpha, as the oldest of them are entering puberty and are going to start Googling shit on YouTube and TikTok. And they're going to be grappling with the concept of performing masculinity and fearing the possibility of failing at it and suffering numerous consequences, or succeeding and suffering other consequences. And that's one thing I also want to get across here, is that much of the manosphere historically and now is built upon a fear response. As boys, we fear that poor performance of masculinity can contribute to bullying and ostracism, which it does.
Which it does. Not just by bullying by men and other men, it's by bullying by women and the expectation of masculinity that women expect out of you in the society. But he's not going to tell you that either. He's going to think it's a male problem. It's a response to, if you don't perform masculine-wise, you're going to get run over in the system, which you will if you don't hold your line. But FD hasn't realized that intersectional feminists actually eat their own. But he'll learn that.
As men, we fear that it will lead to low prospects for intimate partnership and professional success, which it does. Then for a lot of men who ostensibly do perform masculinity effectively, unless they're at the top of the food chain, they will still be susceptible to the harms of late capitalism in the form of exploitation.
It's also the same thing in intersectional feminists. How do you perform masculinity? They just want you to perform masculinity differently. Okay, it's not that they don't want you to perform it; they just want you to perform it in their way. They're trying to reframe masculinity in their own image, or otherwise a hierarchy. But he's not going to say that either. But we're talking about the manosphere now.
Exploitative and dehumanizing work, low wages, poor health practices, etc. And even those at the top of the top still have to contend with the erosion of their soul. This is the infected foundation underneath all of this nonsense that ties it all together and makes the man.
You know something I just noticed? He's an intersectional feminist talking about patriarchy, masculinity, and the negative aspects of it. This motherfucker got the Notorious B.I.G. on his shirt. Are you fucking kidding me? You cannot make this stuff up. You have a symbol. You have the symbol of what you think you call hegemonic masculinity, right? Hegemonic black masculinity. Anti-feminist on your shirt. On your shirt. I just noticed that, man. You can't make this shit up. That's funny.
Manosphere seem to have such widespread reach, as it makes it possible for someone to start out just wanting to build some muscle or learn how to talk to girls or searching for their favorite anime character and end up arguing for things like enforced monogamy, sex redistribution, or that women should be denied the right.
Enforced monogamy. Enforced monogamy. The people are actually asking for enforced monogamy, or more normally women. Okay, normally women. But the thing is if you want to have a monogamy, if your social system is built on a family unit and a nuclear family where the man provides, Okay, and he's going to put his time and money and effort into these children and these people. Okay, you're gonna have to have some kind of guarantee if you're gonna participate in this system. So I have no clue what the dude's talking about. Continuing.
To vote. The scary and hard thing to understand is that, like most social ills, the worst parts of the manosphere stem from a very valid and very universal sense of anguish in men. And we have to contend with and process this if we are ever going to seriously address how to fix the problems that the manosphere presents to us. Up until now, I've mostly been talking only about white men and boys. And while there is plenty of diversity in all of these groups, there are some distinct differences in what most refer to as the black manosphere, which has grown a lot in terms of visibility in the last few years with figures like Kevin Samuels and kind of Fresh and Fit. I'll get to that later. That said, the black manosphere is not new, and to be fair, at least on YouTube, it's probably been around a lot longer in its current state than its white counterparts. And I think it's important to parse out some of these differences before moving on, because we want to keep in mind that these two groups definitely converge in some areas.
How is Dr. Umar Johnson part of the black manosphere? I'm not understanding. Tommy Sotomayor, Kevin Samuels. How does Fresh and Fit into the black manosphere? I'm not quite sure. But why you present these people instead of others? There's others that would actually fit the mold a lot better. But I guess we can't pick and choose.
But separate in others. Unlike his white counterpart, the black manosphere has the benefit of being able to subterfuge a lot of its elements under the guise of pro-black thought and political discourse. Many, not all, but
notice the word subterfuge, okay? A lot of slick words, a lot of slick disses he's putting into his soliloquy right now, right? Into his verbiage. A lot of slick disses, subterfuge. This is why I hate dealing with these kind of people, right? They're disingenuous, okay? Man, just stop covering up your disdain. Stop covering up your disses with $50 words, okay? Stringing them together when you know what the fuck you're talking about. I know you wrote this down. I know you had to practice this stuff. I know you probably do this in your daily life to the point where you can actually recite it backwards and forwards. But anyway, let me continue because I would stop it way too much.
Many of the figures in the black manosphere present themselves as pro-black political figures and talking heads in conjunction with being male advocates. And they just happen to peddle conservative, misogynistic, and every once in a while homophobic rhetoric as solutions to the issues that black people face.
And I'm just saying to anybody, we can't be pro-black if you are, how are you pro-black and not married? This is my issue with a lot of the pro-black movement, especially a lot of pro-black women. I need to see your husband.
The insecurities and frustrations for black men that attract them to the man.
And actually, the pro-blacks push what? Pro-black family, right? Including pro-black women. A lot of your intersectional feminists are actually pushing what? Black love, right? A lot of your intersectional feminists are actually pushing black love, black male love, so that black men will be loyal to them. So you can't speak about the black manosphere without speaking on black women and black intersectional feminists, and also pro-black women that actually preach this stuff, right? They preach pro-black family, pro-black husbands, pro-marriage. Hell, we just had an article about there not being enough black men to marry of a certain quality that meet the definition of what they call masculinity. Brought on by whom? Women. It wasn't by men. Men don't write books about marriage and mating and dating like that, right? There's black women that should do that. Intersectional feminists that do that. And they shit on the men and blame the men for there not being enough of them. They don't talk about white supremacy. They just say black men are defective and they go to jail a lot because they sell drugs and they're violent and whatever else they try to put upon us. But you're not explaining that, nor would you, because that's not your job. You're the intersectional feminist whisperer.
Manosphere is pretty much the same as their white counterparts, except that those frustrations, the financial insecurity, the ugly breakups and divorces, child custody battles, etc., are all made a bit more complicated by structural racism. And along with that, because of structural racism, they also are dealing with high death rates, lower access to healthcare, and barriers to a lot of the ways that the Manosphere preaches for seeking self-help. Historically, the nature of patriarchy has mostly excluded Black men in a traditional sense. Black men as a whole have never fully encapsulated the patriarchal image of father knows best, doting wife, 2 kids.
Most white men haven't either. Okay, father knows best, doting wife, all that kind of stuff is a white bourgeois example. But we're not gonna talk about the Cosby Show, are we? Are we? Or the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, or the bunch of other examples that we that have been presented in the quote-unquote Black patriarchal structure, or the My Wife and Kids. We can go on. Okay, there's a whole bunch of shows that have exemplified what a Black patriarchal structure, what we think of as a Black family structure, which has never really been patriarchal, but that's neither here nor there.
A dog, even those Black men that did have those things were always still barred from the full essence of what that framework was supposed to offer in terms of respect and stability. You can be Black and be the man of the house and the man in your neighborhood, but you were still going to be called boy when the police came around. Plenty of Black men between the 1920s and the 1960s contributed to traditional male-centric communities and played roles as patriarchs in them, only for them to be burned down by white terrorist mobs. However, I would argue that more typically, the Black manosphere grows out of conservative pro-Black movements. As I alluded to in...
Actually, it doesn't, but that is beside the point. It's a mixture of everything. It's actually a big mixture of everything, okay? The Black manosphere is actually very pro-Black. Conservatism in the Black manosphere is mixed. It's complicated. Trust and believe I know.
Previous videos, older generations of Black people who faced a more intense and overtly hostile world of racism and also bore witness to really ugly images and experiences of crime and violence from their own people in Black neighborhoods were very susceptible to a line of thinking that said that Black people's biggest problems was themselves, and that if we just rejected the uglier and negative aspects of Black life and culture and focused more into mimicking what we saw from whiteness, that we would be better off as a people. And to be fair, this isn't wholly untrue. Being closer to whiteness has always been good for people of color, so lighter skinned Black people with certain types of hair or phenotypical features.
Oh, gosh. Continue. I'm not even going to comment on that.
Or even names are historically much more likely to fare better in America under white supremacy. But as I alluded to in the edgelord video and other videos, crime and criminality is socially determined by poverty and lack and environment. And
Thank you. Thank you. Go look at Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union, okay? Thank you. At least you said that. You know, if you're going to tell a great lie, you're going to have to sprinkle in a little bit of truth. So at least he's telling a little bit of truth. I got to give him that. I get him a ding and a cookie for that one, all right?
Structural barriers and the ability of a handful of Black folks to effectively maneuver white supremacy using what we call respectability politics is not a real solution to the issues that Black people face. The core factor to crime in Black communities is how these communities are designed and policed, not how the people behave or wear their hair or wear their pants. A good way to understand this is to look at something like the opioid epidemic.
Why don't you try the Kerner Commission, right? In 1968, okay? We're talking about the opioid versus the crack era. And we're not going to get into that, man, because it'll take too long. Like I said, there's too many different points I can actually object to and point out to, but it will take way too long. In fact, it's already too long. But anyhow, let's continue.
Versus the crack epidemic. When crack began to ravage Black communities in the 80s, the response was tougher policing, longer prison sentences, and more police on the street, sending thousands of Black men to jail for petty drug offenses. While they also passed laws that greatly criminalized the possession of crack in Black neighborhoods, but barely criminalized the possession of the much more potent cocaine in white communities.
Reverend Cecil Williams, thinks law enforcement crackdowns, like the one just announced for Washington, D.C., sweep up the victims as well as the dealers.
There'll be warfare. We will see large numbers of poor people, and specifically blacks, going to jail and to prison, and they will not have a chance to live, to have a productive life. By 1995, more blacks would have gone through the criminal justice system. We're predicting 70% at this time, going through the criminal justice system. Now, I ask you, isn't that the way to completely eradicate a race of people?
Actually, it never happened. That didn't happen. It was never 70%. It's actually really, if you actually count it all, we're going to count everybody, maybe a third at best, more like less than 20%, but at its height. But that is that in the opioid epidemic, because the opioid epidemic is actually ravaging white people in a much different way than the crack epidemic actually ravaged the black community. They're suffering the same thing, but a different way. But that's a different story.
But then as opioids along with meth surged in white communities over the last decade or so, the policy response has been treatment and mental health services and deterrence programs and community engagement that don't ravage these communities. This is the difference between an addict in recovery moving on with his life versus a convicted felon who is unable to find meaningful employment after a lengthy prison sentence during which his community suffered in his absence, which also raises the possibility of recidivism. But a lot of people don't understand this, and so the strong sentiment in a lot of pro-black spaces is that the key to black liberation is the restoration of the black family and to align said black family with the traditional images of family normalized to us by the Western white world.
Because you're in the Western white world, and that's the way the system works. You are socialized to work in that system. You're not socialized to work in an African-centered family. Your laws, your society, your families, your financial structure don't work that way. You're trying to rebuild a financial and social structure on the fly. It doesn't work that way. Okay, you're gonna have. Anyway, man, that would take too long.
AKA hegemony. They don't recognize a system that will always find ways to take us out regardless of how well we perform whiteness. But because that dream is so enticing, a lot of enterprising grifters have constantly presented this idea of fixing the black community through the black family by making it look more like what we think white families look like, which of course often leads to blaming black women on not allowing black men to effectively lead, a narrative made very famous by the Moynihan Report from 1965. The
Moynihan Report never said that, okay? They never said that. They never said that, okay? What the thing is I'm not even gonna get into that. What the Moynihan Report said, if they wanted to assimilate black people into white culture, which is their job, they're going to have to change the structure of the black family, okay? By actually accentuating the men the same way that white men, Jewish men, Arab men, whatever other kind of men that's in other parts of the world do the exact same thing, right? There's a reason for black family failure inside the United States, right? You just pointed to Tulsa as the epitome of black culture and black success, right? Which patterned their families and their culture and their patriarchal leadership on the white system, right? You just talked about it and talked about how white people burned it down. Anyway, can't have both, man. You really can't make this stuff up.
The Moynihan Report was a federal report by sociologist something Moynihan. Fuck him. In this report,
something Moynihan. Fuck him. We're not even going to talk about it. Okay, go ahead. We're actually going to talk about it.
Which is a favorite staple of the black manosphere as well as black conservatives, characterize black men as infantile and lazy and uninterested in self-betterment, partly because black women emasculate them. As a cherry on top, the report, which offered no real solutions, gave one prescription that said that maybe these black men should join the army as a way to reclaim their masculinity. More on that in a later video, but just understand that this report came right in time for the Vietnam War.
Yeah, the Vietnam War had nothing to do with it. Okay, it really had nothing to do with it. But this is an intersectional feminist idea about the Moynihan Report. Okay, but the Moynihan Report and its prescriptions was actually enacted under the Kerner Commission, right? Moynihan actually never prescribed anything. It was actually a study group. Just like you study reparations, it doesn't prescribe an answer. It's actually an active study. That's what the Moynihan Report actually talked about, the problems that he was seeing, but he never prescribed it. The actual prescription was actually in the Kerner Commission 3 years later, where all your affirmative action laws and rights and privileges and what Martin Luther King called the check, that's where it came from. If you put those two together, which nobody ever does, which you are a product of, you're a product of the Moynihan Report and the Kerner Commission. Well, you don't get the Kerner Commission, you don't get affirmative action without the Moynihan Report. Okay, Moynihan convinced that civil rights was no good without the financial component, without the financial, educational, structural component. That's what he was saying. But most people don't read it that far. Fuck them. Well, you say fuck them when you get the privileges. You wouldn't say fuck them if you didn't get it. But that's a different story. Which your Chinese and your Asian are trying to take away your affirmative action. So a guy like him that's living off being an intersectional feminist and the affirmative action that comes along with it, okay, you're going to have a hard time making a living. But continuing.
What a coincidence. This report has been lambasted by a variety of black scholars for its complete absolvement of the constraints of white supremacy and the legacy of white terrorism on these issues that black people face in terms of their families in these communities, as well as its oversimplistic views on gender dynamics between black men and women. It's a report hated both by scholars who discuss black masculinity and by intersectional feminist scholars. Yet it's a favorite of the black manosphere because it gives credence to the conservative talking point that the problem with the black family is black women.
Society, they did not expect to happen what happened. Go read the Moynihan Report and Moynihan Scissors. They did not expect to give government assistance and food stamps to the black community and for women to choose to.
It is true, by the way. Okay. Prove that it's not true. See, he glances over stuff. He doesn't prove his case, but continuing.
The check over the men.
You often hear black manosphere types talk about how the likelihood of a black child being raised in a single parent home has skyrocketed in the last 20 or 30 years. And this is true, but it's also true for every other race in this country. And it doesn't take into account all the other variables that decide whether or not a person is going to be raised in a two-parent household. What they really just want to say is that it's because black women aren't submissive enough. They disregard the well-documented structural barriers to black economic viability or the historical fact that black women have always worked, partially because their labor was more valuable on the open market at certain times in the last 100 or so years, versus black men who, even when not excluded from labor, did not have access to some of the more lucrative house caretaker jobs that black women ended up taking. They just run with the rhetoric about black women not being submissive and blah, 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 blah. You have heard this before. In accordance to that, there have long since been black male figures, especially in the comedy world, such as with Patrice O'Neal, and on YouTube even 10, 15 years ago, who have made money and gained notoriety by peddling misogyny disguised as black liberation. They'll say that the black family...
Misogyny disguised as black liberation. Okay. Anyway.
Must be fixed, and that this cannot be done if the black woman doesn't get behind her man. It doesn't matter that this has never really been how this has worked in our society, in our culture, and even in many cultures in Africa, or that white supremacy bars so many black men from access to the economic and social capital they need to be heads of the household. It doesn't matter.
Which was what the fuck Moynihan was saying in the goddamn report. Did you read it, sir? I don't think you read it. In fact, I challenge you. Let's go through the Moynihan Report. I did. Actually did 9 videos on fucking Moynihan Report. Actually did spent 3 months on the goddamn Kerner Commission. Did you? Anyhow, continuing.
do it anyway, or you hate black people. There are old archives of a lot of these men's content on YouTube if you want to find it. This complicates the black manosphere a bit because while these men still uphold the status quo and spew misogyny, they're also responding to a much more specific and legitimate set of oppressions as opposed to their white counterparts. This doesn't make it any better, it just makes their gripes a bit more legitimate. Aside from that, there's not a lot of material difference between black and white manosphere spaces. Sometimes
You just did. You just said there was. What are you talking about? You just did. You just did. And now there's not that much material difference. Come on, dude.
misogyny comes from a hotep. Sometimes it comes from an aspiring Republican grifter. Sometimes it's just a black version of the same sleazy pickup artist type character. White guys have men going their own way or MGTOW. Black men have save yourself black man or SYSBM. Aside from this, all the other things between black and white men.
You just talked about these acronyms and didn't explain it. That's what I hate about these guys. Anyhow, continuing. Let's go ahead and finish this up, man, because he's irritating me.
In this particular issue are rooted in the same overall constructs, including even some of the most extreme elements, which we'll get to later. One thing I really want to push against, though, is the myth that black men are more conservative or patriarchal or misogynistic than any other race of men. Pretty much every data point that you can point to about black men politically and socially disputes this, whether it be voting patterns, opinion polls, habits, and child rearing. So there's so much evidence that this is a myth, but sadly, black men don't get to define themselves for themselves. And the loudest and worst of us often get the most attention, which is also something I'll talk about.
Which went with black women want to define us, okay? They don't talk about black women, especially black intersectional feminists trying to define what masculinity or black masculinity is. So that's why Dr. Johnson calls black men ConcuServe, right? Because even our women won't let us define ourselves, which is what the black manosphere is about, defining ourselves, whether you like it or not. Continuing.
A little later. That said, the loud bunch of black men who do attach their identity to the manosphere are just as ardent and dedicated and, ridiculous as any white consumer of the manosphere. So it's hard to see that sometimes. I get it.
Another thing I did is
That's the whole thing. See, that's the low-key diss that he's shooting. It's not a fair assessment, right? He might as well be Brittany Cooper, okay? Really, he's Brittany Cooper in a male body. Really, that's what's going on. You sound like one of them, like the Joker said, right? I'm gonna use the Joker, right? When he talked to Batman, okay? Don't talk like them, because you're not. You're not. In other words, you're an intersectional feminist actually performing as a male. So they could put a dress on you, would sound exactly the same. But you don't realize that you have been indoctrinated, inculcated, and brainwashed in this thinking pattern. I would rather that you actually stop using these particular terms, actually look at actually read the material and come to your own conclusion. And then if you want to say that this is your idea, this is your talking points, or this is your worldview, I can accept that. You're not doing that. You basically, you're looking actually to pander to a black intersectional feminist, because they know that the black manosphere is actually what? It's actually viable and dangerous to their status quo, to their money. Okay, that's how come they're upset about it. Anyway, continuing.
We recognized where this video was going. I knew I had to reach out to some of my usual folks to make sure there were some black men speaking on some of those specific elements of the black experience within this whole phenomenon.
A breakup, how to talk to a woman, how to do this, how to do that. And then the very, very, very...
Notice something, man. Notice the way all these guys look, okay? Notice the way that they look, okay? What they have in common, okay? Look at the softness of them, okay? Anyway, continuing.
First instance of that was this isn't my proudest moment, but when I was 14, 15 years old, I read a pickup lines book, right? And that kind of
heard about him, like the egg boy who made a name for himself accosting Taylor Swift because she was almost 30 and hadn't had kids yet, and was like, your eggs, lady, you need to take care of your pure Aryan eggs, right? And a lot of other dudes like Fresh and Fit, and there's Joker, a guy in the manosphere who literally calls himself heckin' Joker, right? That's cringe.
I think within Black families and black communities, there are sometimes like support structures and stuff, but I think sometimes the type of support you need is like, sometimes people don't know how to give it. I think you're talking, I was thinking about how, like, I never really got involved in like any incel communities, but like I'm an atheist, and I've been, I was like real big into like the new atheism shit back in the day. But that community was just filled with angry white men.
What are you doing? People are watching this. And I'm just like, that's exactly the point. I said, it's one thing to be talking about all of this, we're progressive, we could show vulnerability. It's another thing to actually do it.
What's going on, people? So yeah, this video, which is already like an hour and a half long, would have been longer. It was looking to be almost 3 hours long, and between technical difficulties, contractual obligations to get this video out at a certain time, and just the fact that I was rushing to finish that last part and it really wasn't up to par. It was being edited by me and not Needless, so it didn't have all the nice flares and things that this section has. I decided that I need to split it. And I am disappointed because
Okay. He's gonna do a part 2. I don't know if I'm gonna do anything with part 2 because, like I said, it's taking me like an hour to get through just 30 minutes, which I think I've done a pretty good job about letting stuff run and just countering his points without too much interference. So I'm gonna try to kind of put this up, and hopefully it'll serve whoever I can't remember the sub that sent it to me as an entry point for the other PhDs to actually weigh in on it. They're actually much more steeped in this stuff, much more expert in this stuff than I am, okay? Because I haven't read all the books. I'm not an intersectional feminist. I wasn't trained that way, okay? I am a more geopolitical structuralist, right? And a geopolitical realist, okay? I deal in financial structures, political structures around the world, and how structures are built around the world. I don't really delve into little minute feminist aspects of the United States, right? Because even intersectional feminism is just a small, tiny core of American life, okay? They try to blow it up and to make it bigger than it is, okay? When it's convenient for white women to actually use it and appropriate it and use it, weaponize it against black people, they do it. They've done it in the past. They did it in 1860. They did it in 1920. They did it in 1970. They're doing it in the 21st century. And black people are becoming their pets, and they're, as Julian used to call them, flying monkeys. Black folks, intersectional feminists, actually the flying monkeys of white feminism. It is what it is. And you can actually hear it in their words by the books they use, the authors that they quote, the type of rhetoric that they use. That this is not black rhetoric. This is white feminist rhetoric regurgitated out of a black face. So anyhow, man. So I'm going to try to edit this, put this up, and maybe this is an entry point. If he does a part 2, I may do a part 2. If Dr. Johnson wants to go further, I may do another part of it. This is something that was pushed on us. Hey, man, you got to respond to this. Responding to these people, man, make no sense. Responding to them is worse than actually responding to women. Okay, women, if you actually hit them with something, they'll actually back down and be quiet, right? Or they actually go back and do research. These guys are so wedded and so brainwashed that they believe in their worldview that they can't really punch their way out of a paper bag. But they're rewarded for it. He makes money from it. These guys are actually rewarded by women, by black women, for agreeing with them or kissing their ass. So this guy is like the intersectional feminist version of Derek Jackson. Look that up, sir. Without any further ado, we're going to bounce out of here. This is BGS out, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.